A white billionaire woman disappeared after a tragedy. Years later, she was sitting alone in a park until a black girl approached her with a cookie. That gesture changed everything. A family that seemed to be helped became her salvation. Subscribe to the channel and post in the comments where you're watching from. The wind clawed through the narrow Brooklyn alleyways, tugging at coats and scarves, slicing through layers as if winter had teeth. The city was alive with the rhythms of a holiday it barely paused to acknowledge. Delivery trucks hummed, traffic lights blinked in mechanical indifference, and people moved quickly with shopping bags swinging like pendulums of purpose. But on a quiet stretch of sidewalk near the corner of Greenpoint and Little North, a woman sat very still on an old iron bench, her hands wrapped around a lukewarm thermos, her eyes lost in the place where memory and silence overlap. Caroline Everett did not look like someone who had once signed skyscrapers into existence. Her gray wool coat, though finely made, had frayed edges at the cuffs. Her hat, pulled low over silver-streaked hair, was unremarkable. She sat with a certain regal stillness, but there was nothing loud or noticeable about her anymore. Only the loneliness was loud. That, and the way she gripped the thermos, a motionless grasp more like someone holding on to the last ember of a fire long gone out. She came to this bench every Thanksgiving. Always alone, always just before sunset. For the city, the day was about football and overeating, parades on screens, and sales that started before the dishes were even washed. For Caroline, it was about one moment, one breath in the cold air, where she could remember her daughter's laugh and the way her granddaughter used to swing her legs from this very bench, kicking at invisible leaves. They were gone. A fire had taken them swiftly with the brutal precision only real tragedy possesses. The brownstone they had lived in together was now a flat lot fenced with plywood, the memories buried in ash and paperwork. Caroline had not been there. She had been at a gala, across the bridge accepting an award she no longer remembered the name of, in a dress that still hung in the back of some forgotten closet. She had disappeared after that. Sold what could be sold, gave away what would not cling. She vanished with intention, not into poverty, but into invisibility, slipping from penthouse to rented room to friendless space until even the gossip blog stopped wondering if she was dead. Now she lived without title, without schedule, without anyone asking her to be who she had been. But this bench remembered, and that was enough. She lifted the thermos, took a sip. It had gone cold, bitter, from steeping too long. She didn't flinch. That too was part of the ritual. She leaned back slowly and let the wind press against her face. The sun had dipped low now, casting the sidewalk in soft orange and shadow. Then she heard it, footsteps that didn't rush, voices that didn't blend into the passing crowd. A child's voice, high and curious. "Mommy, why is that lady so sad?" Caroline stiffened, almost imperceptibly. She didn't look toward the voice. Children asked questions like that, pure, inconvenient, unfiltered. It would pass. "Sweetheart," came a woman's gentle reply, "we don't ask things like that." "Puppy." "But she looks like she lost her puppy." There was a pause, then the footsteps slowed. Out of the corner of her eye, Caroline saw a flash of orange, bright yarn wrapped around a small neck. The girl was no more than 7, with big eyes and a jacket slightly too large. Her boots squeaked with each step, and her mittened hand clutched a crumpled napkin, the kind that came with deli muffins. "Excuse me," said the woman, her voice low, careful. "My daughter was just concerned. We didn't mean to bother you." Caroline turned her head, just enough to look at them. The child was still staring, wide-eyed but not afraid. The mother, early 30s, warm brown skin, tired shoulders, offered a small apologetic smile. Her name, Caroline would learn later, was Maria. "No bother," Caroline murmured, her voice hoarse from disuse. "Just cold air and old bones." The girl stepped forward. "Are you hungry?" she asked. "We have a muffin. It's cranberry." "Bella?" Maria said quickly, reaching out, but Caroline lifted a hand. "That's kind of you," she said, surprised to hear her own voice sound almost alive. "But I'm fine." Bella studied her, then held out the muffin anyway. And something in Caroline's chest cracked, not in pain, but in something else, something small and unexpected and terribly human. She took the muffin. Maria hesitated, unsure whether to pull her daughter back or stay. "You have a place to go for dinner?" Maria asked quietly. The question hung there, heavy and light all at once. Caroline could have lied. She could have smiled, nodded, waved them off, but instead, she looked down at the muffin in her lap and said, "No." There was no drama in the word, just truth. Maria looked at her daughter. Bella was already smiling. "Then come with us," she said, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. Caroline blinked. "I couldn't possibly." "We don't have turkey or anything fancy," Maria added quickly. "Just lentils and some cornbread, but the heater works and the door opens." That should have been the end of it. The woman should have declined, smiled politely, stood and left. But instead, Caroline Everett, former magnate of glass and steel, nodded. "All right." They walked slowly through the city, Bella skipping a few steps ahead, Caroline behind, her hands deep in her coat pockets. Maria walked beside her in silence, not prying, not pressing, simply there. The building was old, with chipped green paint on the door and a light that flickered above, like it couldn't quite decide if it belonged in the present. Inside, the apartment was small but clean, cluttered in the way lived-in places always were. A patchwork blanket covered the couch. A pot simmered quietly on the stove. Caroline stood awkwardly just inside the threshold, uncertain of where to be. "Coat rack's wobbly," Maria said, "but it holds if you believe in it." Caroline chuckled before she meant to. Bella tugged her hand. "You can sit in Daddy's chair," she said. "It's the softest." Maria flinched slightly at the mention, but said nothing. Caroline moved toward the chair, a little saggy in the arms, worn fabric soft with use. She sat down and felt it embrace her in a way no leather armchair in a boardroom ever had. She closed her eyes for a moment. Dinner was simple, warm, filled with soft conversation and the occasional clatter of mismatched spoons. Caroline didn't speak much, but she listened to the rhythm of a household that made space for one another, even when nothing was easy. Later, after Bella had fallen asleep on the couch beneath the patchwork blanket, Maria handed Caroline a chipped ceramic mug with warm tea and honey. They sat in the kitchen, the only light coming from a single bulb over the stove. "You can stay," Maria said, "just for the night." Caroline nodded. "Thank you." She didn't ask why. She didn't have to. That night, Caroline lay awake on the couch, listening to the hum of the heater and the breathing of a child in the next room. She held the photograph in her hand, the one she never let go of. But this time, she didn't cry. She simply closed her eyes and whispered into the quiet, "I'm still here." And the room, filled with warmth and the scent of lentils and cornbread, whispered back, "Yes, you are." Morning arrived on quiet feet. The first rays of sun stretched across the small apartment, slipping between thin curtains, warming mismatched kitchen tiles and the faded fabric of the couch where Caroline Everett lay with her eyes already open. She had not slept deeply. Her body had rested, yes, soothed by the unfamiliar comfort of warmth and silence, but her mind had moved restlessly beneath the surface. Dreams had stirred, fragments of faces, laughter that no longer had a source, the distant sound of fire and the shattering of glass. And yet, when she sat up and let her feet touch the scuffed floor, something in her bones felt lighter. She folded the blanket with care and placed it neatly on the couch. The photograph of her daughter and granddaughter remained in the pocket of her coat, but she did not take it out this morning. Instead, she moved into the kitchen, where the scent of yesterday's dinner still lingered faintly in the air, now mingled with coffee and the sweetness of something baking. Maria stood by the stove, stirring a pot. Her hair was pulled back loosely, and she wore an old sweatshirt over her scrubs. "Good morning," Maria said, not startled by the older woman's presence. "I didn't want to wake you." "I was already up," Caroline replied, her voice smoother than it had been the night before. Maria poured her a cup of coffee, gestured to the seat at the tiny kitchen table. Caroline sat, wrapping her fingers around the warm mug as if it tethered her to the present. There was no awkwardness between them, no apology for the night before. The silence was companionable, the way it is between people who have both known solitude and chosen to breach it, if only briefly. From the other room, the sound of small footsteps approached. Bella burst in, eyes still sleepy but face lit with joy. She wore pajamas patterned with tiny cats and one sock missing. "You stayed," she said, beaming at Caroline. "I told Mommy you would." Caroline smiled, a real smile this time, not the half-courteous curve she had offered the world for years. "You were right." Breakfast was modest, scrambled eggs, toast, and slices of apple, but it felt like a feast. Bella talked as she ate, about school, about a classmate who brought glitter glue into art class, about how she wanted to make a snow globe this year if they could find an old jar. Maria listened, responding when needed, but Caroline found herself caught in the rhythm of their lives. It had been so long since she'd shared a table with anyone, so long since her name had been spoken aloud in a home not layered with marble and silence. When Maria gathered her coat for work, she hesitated. "I have to do a long shift today. You're welcome to stay if you'd like. Bella goes to school in 20 minutes, but she can walk herself. It's not far." Caroline looked at the child, who nodded solemnly as if this were a matter of great responsibility. She could have declined, could have walked out into the day and disappeared again, but instead, she nodded. "I'll stay." After Maria left, Caroline helped Bella find her missing sock and pack her school bag. She stood by the door as the child ran off with a wave, her orange scarf trailing behind like a streak of paint across the gray sidewalk. Then, the apartment was silent again. She wandered for a moment, unsure of the etiquette of guesthood in a place so humble and welcoming. Her fingers brushed the edges of books, photographs, a ceramic mug with a chipped rim. In the corner of the kitchen sat a spiral notebook. Maria's, she guessed, filled with schedules, notes, reminders, lists, written in careful handwriting. On the next page, a small, unfinished drawing. Without thinking, Caroline picked up the pen that lay beside it and drew a single curved line, then another. Before she realized it, she had sketched the arch of a doorway, the suggestion of a roof. She stared at the page for a long time. Later that day, when Maria returned home, her face flushed with fatigue and wind, Caroline was sitting at the table with a pot of tea already steeping. "I hope you don't mind," she said. "I noticed you were out of sugar, so I picked some up. And milk." "I had some cash." Maria blinked, then smiled. "Of course not. Thank you." They sat, and the quiet resumed, but this time it hummed with new energy. Caroline hesitated. Her fingers curled around the handle of the teacup. "I haven't been honest with you," she said finally. Maria didn't move. "My name is real, but most of what I've let you believe, it's not. I wasn't always like this. Not long ago, I had more than I knew what to do with. I built things, buildings, towers, communities in name, but not in truth. I made wealth look easy. I gave speeches about innovation, about family values, about architectural legacy." She looked up, then I lost them. Maria didn't ask who them was. She didn't need to. "There was a fire," Caroline continued, her voice low and steady. "I wasn't home. They were. My daughter and my granddaughter. I didn't want to live in a world where their laughter was just echo. So I stopped. Stopped working. Stopped showing up. Stopped being Caroline Everett, CEO, philanthropist, city builder. I gave most of it away. Not as penance, not even as generosity, just to make the silence bearable." Maria breathed in, then out. "And now?" Caroline looked at her. "Now I'm tired of silence." The words hung in the air like snowfall. Maria didn't fill the space. She just nodded, a soft acknowledgement. Days passed, each one slower and fuller than the last. Caroline stayed. She cooked simple meals, swept the floor without being asked, and repaired a cabinet door that had been hanging loose for weeks. Bella insisted on reading her stories in the evenings, often pausing to explain every illustration. Caroline, for her part, found herself laughing, really laughing, at the strange plot lines and dramatic voices. And then one day, walking home from the corner market with a paper bag of carrots and tea bags, Caroline paused in front of a long abandoned building. The stone facade was weathered but proud. Above the cracked archway, faded letters read, "Brooklyn Youth Enrichment Hall." The windows were boarded and the steps were crumbling, but something in the bones of the place called to her. She stood there for a long time, bag growing heavy in her hands. That evening, after dinner, she told Maria about it. "There's a building 3 blocks away," she said. "I think it used to be a community center." Maria raised an eyebrow. "The old enrichment hall? That's been empty for years." "It could be saved," Caroline said. "The frame looked intact. It has light from both sides. There's space for classrooms, a kitchen, maybe a garden." Maria stared at her. "You want to rebuild it?" "I want to use my hands again. I want to make something that lives." Maria didn't answer right away. Then she nodded. "Let's go see it tomorrow." But the city has long memories, and so do people. It began slowly. A man at the bakery recognized Caroline. He didn't say anything, but he stared too long. A day later, an envelope arrived in the mailbox with no return address. Inside was a tabloid clipping from years ago, a picture of Caroline at a gala wearing diamonds, smiling. Someone had written across the image in red ink, "Where is she now?" Then came the whispers. In the street, at the pharmacy, questions spoken too loudly near open windows. One afternoon, a man in a suit stood across the street from Maria's building, pretending to read a newspaper that trembled slightly in his grip. Caroline stood at the window, watching. "They're finding me," she said. Maria didn't look up from chopping onions. "Then let them. I can leave." "No," Maria said. "You can stay. We know who you are now, not who you were. That's enough." But the pressure mounted. Former colleagues sent letters. Lawyers, polite but sharp, began asking about funds Caroline had once dispersed. The mention of lawsuits hung in the air like dust unsettled. And still, Caroline did not leave. She walked to the old community hall every day, took measurements, sketched layouts on the back of paper bags. Bella drew pictures of what she imagined the inside would look like. Beanbag chairs, bookshelves, a corner for dancing. They called it the House of Hope. And though the world outside seemed ready to remember her only for what she'd lost, Caroline had begun to remember what she could still give. She was not invisible anymore. She was building again. The morning light washed the apartment in a soft golden hue, and the scent of brewed coffee filled the narrow kitchen before Caroline even reached for her cardigan. The city, usually indifferent to personal rebirth, had not slowed its march. But within the little apartment on the second floor, something had shifted. There was purpose now, a rhythm that carried a different weight. Each morning, Caroline awoke not with dread, but with a quiet urgency. She had found something to do that mattered. Maria was already dressed for her shift, buttoning up her scrubs with practiced movements. Bella sat at the table, swinging her legs and finishing her cereal, a purple crayon in one hand, a notepad in front of her. Caroline watched them with a kind of reverence she hadn't felt in years, not since her own daughter had stood in the kitchen asking for toast with cinnamon or spilled milk across the tiles just to see if the cat would lick it up. The notebook was filled with drawings, crude, colorful, and full of imagination. One page in particular stood out. It showed a building with wide glass windows, a rainbow arched over the roof, and stick figures holding hands beneath a sign that read, "House of Hope." The letters were backward in places, but the message was clear. "I want there to be a reading room," Bella said as Caroline leaned in to admire the sketch, "with pillows on the floor, big ones, and a wall where you can write anything you want and no one gets mad." Caroline smiled. "That sounds like something we can make." By noon, she was back at the old community building. The facade still stood, stubborn and noble, even as vines crept through cracks and graffiti clung to the brick. She walked its perimeter daily, sketchpad in hand, adjusting measurements, noting which beams could be salvaged and where the light entered best. People had started noticing her. A few even offered to help. One of them was Aaron, a retired contractor who lived 2 blocks away. He had heard rumors of the lady architects returning, of some grand project funded not by the city, but by willpower and maybe guilt. He didn't ask questions when he introduced himself. He simply said, "I've got tools and time. I know rot when I see it. This place, it ain't gone yet." Word spread. A group of teenagers from the nearby high school showed up one Saturday morning, offering to clean out debris. A young woman from the local church dropped off sandwiches and gloves. A man Caroline didn't know brought lumber wrapped in plastic and walked away without leaving his name. Caroline worked beside them. She rolled up her sleeves, dust in her hair, hands blistered but alive with motion. She moved differently now, no longer the figurehead who oversaw from polished balconies. Here, she was part of the scaffolding. Her name wasn't whispered with awe, it was spoken with familiarity. She was Miss Caroline now. Sometimes, just Caroline. And every time someone said it, she felt a piece of her return. But as the structure of the building began to take shape, so did the opposition. A letter arrived. Thick, cream-colored envelope, no return address. Inside, printed in sharp serif font, was a cease and desist notice. Former partners from her development firm, people who had once toasted champagne to her vision, now claimed she was illegally using proprietary designs and intellectual property. The letter threatened to freeze any remaining assets and halt construction by legal injunction. Caroline read it in silence, seated at the kitchen table. Maria stood by the sink, her shoulders stiffening with each sentence. "Is it true?" Maria asked finally. "No," Caroline said. "They're reaching. They want to scare me, maybe punish me for walking away, for doing something without them." "Can they stop the build?" "They can try." Maria's jaw set in quiet defiance. "Then we find someone who can fight back." His name was Leonard Hayes, an old friend, older enemy, and reluctant ally. Once a rising star in municipal law, Leonard had represented Caroline decades ago when her firm had sued a city commissioner for breach of contract. He had a silver beard now and walked with a limp from a skiing accident that had ended his career in private practice. But his mind was still sharp as glass. Caroline visited him in a quiet office above a bookstore in downtown Manhattan. The room smelled of paper and scotch, and Leonard greeted her with a look that was neither warm nor cold, just curious. "I wondered when I'd see you again," he said. "Last I heard, you'd vanished into some mountain retreat." "I found something worth returning for," she replied. He read the letter, slowly, lips pursed in thought. When he finished, he tapped a yellow legal pad with his pen. "Their case is thin. No court will issue an injunction on this. But it's not about winning, it's about slowing you down, making you bleed money and time." "I have time," she said. "The rest, I'll figure out." Leonard studied her for a moment. "You're not the woman I used to know." "I hope not," she said. They left it at that. With Leonard's help, the threats were answered swiftly and publicly. He filed counterstatements, pointed out the lack of contractual language tying her blueprints to any corporate property. He reminded the press, gently but firmly, of her philanthropic legacy and the community-centered nature of the project. The tide turned. People began to speak more loudly in her defense. Local business owners donated supplies. The high school art class painted a mural across the side of the building, hands of all sizes reaching toward a rising sun. Someone spray-painted the words "Welcome Back" on the construction fence, and no one dared cover it. Caroline organized an open forum one evening in the small church across the street. Folding chairs were set in rows, and a table at the front held her old sketchbook, some models of the building, and a simple cardboard sign. "Let's build together." People came, not dozens, hundreds. Caroline stood before them, her hands trembling only slightly. "I don't expect forgiveness," she began. "I don't even ask for it. But I want to use what I've learned to create something that stays, something that serves. I can't undo what I've lost, but I can help build something for those who are still here." Silence followed. Then a hand rose in the back, a man in his 60s, cane resting against his leg. My granddaughter's been looking for a safe place to study after school. She's scared of the shelter walk. Caroline nodded. Another voice. My son used to come to the old center. Kept him out of trouble. If you're bringing that back, I'll be first in line to help. Then another, and another. By the end of the night, volunteers had signed up for every weekend through spring. Instruction resumed with renewed energy. Caroline spent her days between blueprints and wheelbarrows, her evenings with Bella, planning a library corner made of recycled shelves and floor pillows stuffed with donated fabric. Maria helped with permits, organized meetings with educators and counselors. Together, they were creating more than a building. They were carving out sanctuary. One afternoon, Caroline stood in the nearly finished main room. The walls were painted a warm, earthy cream. The windows, newly installed, cast rectangles of sunlight onto the floor. Children's artwork already lined one wall, and bookshelves stood waiting to be filled. Aaron approached her, wiping sweat from his brow. Looks like a real place now. Caroline nodded. It is. They stood in silence, watching the light move across the walls. This, she said softly, is better than any tower I ever built. You finally got it, Aaron said. Legacy isn't glass and steel. It's the space you leave for others to breathe. Caroline didn't answer. She didn't need to. Outside, the sign had been hung. House of Hope. And this time, it bore her name not as a monument, but as a promise. The morning the House of Hope officially opened, the city awoke with a chill in its bones and a sky made of pewter. The streets were slick with rain from the night before, but the clouds had lifted just enough to let light seep through in threads, like hope pushing through cracks in sorrow. Caroline stood alone in the doorway of the finished building, her coat neatly buttoned, her hands folded in front of her. She breathed in the scent of new paint, polished wood, and something sweeter, like sugar and paper and the laughter of unseen children. It was the smell of something beginning. The main room had been transformed. Where once there were broken beams and rock, there now stood shelves lined with books, mats for sitting, a coffee station with a cheerful orange kettle, and walls that held art and messages from the community. The mural painted by local students stretched across the southern wall, an abstract burst of hands and light, stitched together by threads of color that danced from one corner to the next. In the center of the room, beneath a skylight that Caroline had insisted remain uncovered, stood a table with fresh flowers and a simple plaque that read, "For those we remember and those we welcome." Caroline walked the room slowly, letting her fingers brush the edges of the surfaces she had come to know so intimately. There was the classroom space with folding chairs and a chalkboard donated by a retired teacher. There was the pantry stocked with canned goods, dry cereals, and the promise of warm meals. And in the far corner of the building, where the roof had once sagged and threatened collapse, was a quiet room with soft lighting, floor pillows, and a bookshelf painted with vines and birds by Bella's own hand. They called it the listening room. She sat there now, alone, letting her thoughts settle like dust. The ribbon-cutting ceremony was scheduled for 11. Maria had gone ahead to gather volunteers and arrange last-minute details. Bella was already wearing the dress she'd picked out 2 weeks ago, bouncing with excitement. But Caroline had arrived early, not just to prepare, but to remember. She closed her eyes and thought of her daughter, of the way her voice had tilted upward when telling stories, of the softness of her hands, the calm way she calmed a storm. And she thought of the child whose laughter had once echoed off the stone steps of their brownstone, who had sat beside her on a bench on Thanksgiving mornings, legs swinging, scarf unraveling. "I hope you see this," Caroline whispered, and in the stillness of the room, she believed that maybe, just maybe, they did. Outside, the sound of footsteps began to gather. Not the rushed, isolated clatter of city walkers, but a rhythm, measured and communal. A procession of lives converging toward a single address. Caroline stood and made her way to the door. Maria spotted her from across the street and gave a quick wave. She wore a gray blazer and a red scarf, her expression calm but bright. Bella ran ahead, nearly tripping on the curb, and barreled into Caroline with an embrace that felt like sunlight. You came early, Bella said, grinning. I never left, Caroline replied. Soon, the building's entrance was surrounded. Neighbors, friends, former skeptics, curious passers-by. A few reporters held small cameras, unsure where to stand. A local councilwoman, who had previously kept her distance, stood near the edge of the crowd with a clipboard and a bouquet she clearly hadn't expected to give. Caroline stepped forward. Someone handed her the ceremonial scissors, red-handled and over-polished. She almost laughed at the absurdity of it all. Then she looked out over the gathered crowd, met Maria's eyes, then Bella's, and finally looked up at the sign above the door. House of Hope. The blades closed with a quiet snip. Cheers erupted, hands clapped, children shouted. Someone began singing off-key and others joined in. Caroline smiled. Not the smile of press conferences past, not the constructed composure of boardroom victories, but the soft, human smile of someone whose heart had not only survived, but changed. Inside, the rooms came alive. Children spilled across the reading space, dragging pillows into nests. Volunteers served cider and warm bread. A local jazz trio played near the entry, their soft horns weaving through the noise, like wind through trees. Caroline moved among them, not above them, her presence natural, grounding. She ended up in the listening room again, this time not alone. Bella sat cross-legged on the floor with two younger boys, reading aloud from a picture book about animals who find a new home. Maria leaned in the doorway, arms crossed, watching her daughter with a quiet awe. You gave her something I couldn't, she said to Caroline. Caroline shook her head. You gave her roots, I just added a window. The words hung there between them. Later that afternoon, long after the cider had cooled and the musicians had packed up their cases, Caroline walked outside and sat on the same bench she had found that first Thanksgiving, the one near the park with peeling paint and a view of the city just far enough away to forget it. She sat with her coat pulled tight and her scarf tucked in. Maria joined her a moment later, holding 2 cups of coffee. She handed one over without speaking. I didn't think this would happen, Caroline said. Any of it. You made it happen. No, I broke. That little girl, your daughter, she saw the cracks and didn't flinch. She filled them. Maria was quiet, then said, You gave her someone who listens. They sat like that for a long time, sipping coffee, watching the leaves shift colors across the ground. People passed, some waving, some nodding. Others didn't notice them at all. And it didn't matter. Eventually, Maria asked, What now? Caroline thought for a moment. Now we make sure the doors stay open, that it's never about me, that when someone walks through, they feel the space was waiting for them. And you? Caroline looked up at the sky, pale and streaked with clouds. I think I'd like to teach. Maybe drawing. Or memory keeping. Something where silence can become something else. You're good with silence, Maria said. I had a long time to practice. That night, Caroline returned to her own room for the first time in weeks. It was still Maria's apartment, still the place where this all began, but a neighbor had offered her the small unit upstairs, just a flight away from Bella's stories and the kitchen's warmth. The furniture was sparse, the light dim, but she placed a photograph on the bedside table and breathed in the quiet. For the first time in years, the silence didn't ache. Months passed. The House of Hope became more than a building. It became habit. Children came after school. Mothers gathered in the evenings. Teachers brought lesson plans. Retirees brought skills they hadn't used since the 70s. The rooms buzzed, not with grandeur, but with care, with purpose. Caroline led workshops. She listened more than she spoke. She taught Bella how to use a ruler and how to draw lines that sang. Maria kept her hours at the hospital but now coordinated a food program through the center. They weren't family in the traditional sense, but something deeper had grown between them, woven from grief, resilience, and the quiet bravery of showing up every day. One evening, Caroline returned from the center to find a small envelope at her door. No stamp, just her name in a child's handwriting. Inside was a folded paper, a drawing. It was the House of Hope, but this time the windows were lit, and smoke curled from the chimney. Beside it stood 3 figures, one tall with white hair, one with curly braids, and one small figure with an orange scarf. At the top, it read, "Home." Caroline pressed it to her chest. In the end, she had not rebuilt what she lost. She had built something that remembered and made space for everything still to come. If this story moved you, don't forget to subscribe for more. Watch our next video for another unforgettable journey and share this one with someone who needs it.